Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I am Kris. This is part 2 of, I said Luis Garavito, but I think she said Lou. No, Lou. How'd she say it? I said Luis. I don't care if I get his name wrong. Who cares? Serial killer. All right. This is part 2, by the way. Before we get started, click on that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, helps me out. You want to sponsor a video, click on the thanks button, donate to the channel, request a video, there you go. Okay, we're going to get into part 2. She's doing a lot more talking. I was hoping to cover more of the crime. If none of you like it and this is a complete bust of an episode, then I'll cover the casual criminalist because I love that channel. And it's really good. All right. I'm going to eat a little bit of dinner. It's just a salad. All right. I apologize. I got a beer, some salad. Let's do this.
To express the way that he felt about his crimes without remorse. And we see that typically with psychopaths. And Dr. Beneke actually said he's a typical serial killer. He acts out his fantasies. He's that kind of classic paedophile where he seems very soft-spoken, very kind, very sweet. And that's the deal, right? If you want to get a child to go anywhere with you, you're pretty much going to have to learn how to manipulate them. You're going to have to be approachable, kind. You're going to have to coerce them into believing in you. And one of the things that really chills me to the bone is that Garavito actually recalls when he's being interviewed that there was one particular child that he felt really sorry for because this child actually confided in him that he himself had been sexually molested. And because Garavito had been sexually molested as a young person, he did feel a level of empathy with him. He pitied that child, but it didn't stop him sexually abusing him, molesting him, and murdering him. So even though he could relate to this child, the fact that he himself had been in that situation, it didn't create any kind of limit to the behavior. Even though he could see himself in that position, he still went ahead and murdered that child. And when you explore what Dr. Beneke found out, it's absolutely horrific, because he confesses very openly to raping and murdering more than 300 to 400 kids. He did that in around 7 years. 7 years? That's the time frame that he gives it. He was in his 30s and 40s around that time. And the police genuinely think that he at least killed 400 people. I mean, think about the level of abuse. Think about what kind of a human being can have such bloodlust, such absolute desire to do as much damage as possible, and also to the most vulnerable. I mean, children are vulnerable per se, right? They are the ones that we want to protect more than anything. Imagine being able not only to do the opposite of protect them, but to choose the most hard done to, the most vulnerable, the most foundationless. You know, he didn't just go for weak, he went for the ultimate weakest. And he also did it so that he wouldn't get caught, because who cares about homeless orphan kids, right? Because I think that's a bigger question for us as a society, isn't it? In the developing world, and even in the developed world, like in the Western world, we have this idea that we're protective, but we're not. We always allow people to fall through the net. I mean, there are people on the streets in the UK, in the USA, in Australia, in Canada. There are people literally living on the streets. That's not a developed society, but we think that we're better than other societies. But here we are, an example of in other countries where they're less developed and children are treated as if they're vermin, to such a degree that police forces didn't even care about the fact that lots of children were going missing. This was like the Pied Piper. The evil Pied Piper had come into a village and removed a lot of the children. That's how serious this level of killing was. And yet it was just allowed to carry on. And I have no doubt whatsoever that in developing countries, this is still carrying on elsewhere. And even in Western world, we see many, many people disappearing without trace. It blows my mind a lot of the time when I look at the statistics and I'm like, is anybody else going to have a conversation about these missing children? Surely we should be having these debates, but it doesn't seem to happen. Is it like an acceptance in our society, in our social fabric, that children are just going to disappear and the vulnerable are just going to disappear? Because it certainly seems that way to me when I look at the statistics. But who am I to say? One of the things that Garavito was very open about doing was he liked talking about his crimes. You know, one of the things that serial killers and paedophiles enjoy, and we know this from a lot of research, is that they enjoy talking about what they did because it gives a sense of power, but it also means they relive the event. It's also one of the problems when you put lots of sex offenders together on a prison ward, because of the fact that you're then in a situation where they are sharing fantasies. And there's some pretty gruesome things that we've heard about where paedophiles in prison will actually swap addresses of their own children with other paedophiles. This is real, this definitely happens. And to some degree, putting them all together is not a way of, shall we say, stopping those kind of thoughts and intrusions. If anything, I think probably the way that we work with them in the system needs to change massively, because essentially you would ideally get them away from individuals who have the similar predilection, because there's a permission base there, right? But it's the same with serial killers. They enjoy reliving their crimes because every kind of crime begins as a fantasy. Everything begins fantasy orientated. Just think about it. Think about your own sexual fantasies. A lot of people, you think about them before you carry them out. You know, you fantasize about what you would like to happen to you before you go ahead and do it. It's the same with crime. It's the same with serial killing. It's the same with paedophilia. You're thinking about this fantasy, and often you're constantly trying to create the ideal fantasy that you've played in your head out in reality, which is why very often a serial killer can't get that hit, because they can never create a reality compared to the fantasy that they have in their head. Because as I've said before on this channel, people are unpredictable, children are unpredictable, but that's what leads a lot of these individuals to keep chasing that high. So Garavito was very helpful with the police. Again,
Another thing is like a drug, like a drug addict who uses cocaine or heroin for the first time. That hit is the best hit that they'll ever take. Every other time they use that drug, they will never feel that crack cocaine. They'll never feel that enjoyment. Well, I guess cocaine, I already covered it. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting myself. They'll never feel that same hit, that same endorphin kick in the brain that signifies this is just the best. Everyone after that will be chasing that feeling. And eventually they got to use more and more and more because it never feels the same. It's never going to get back to that first one. So with the serial killer, child killer, right? The fantasy comes through in some aspect. And then I have to cough. The fantasy comes through. They do it. They kill. But then the next time they want to try something a little different. And then maybe I want to relive that first one, but it's never the same. It's never better. It's always going to be chasing that high. So that's another aspect of it.
very helpful / manipulative, because remember, he wants to seem like he's not really that bad a guy. I know that might seem completely left field. Why, after killing lots of children, would you think that you could ever be seen as anything but a reprehensible human being? But just go with me on this one. He absolutely believed that he could manipulate the police and make them feel that he was completely on side, you know, potentially that he'd realised the error of his ways. He drew maps and he led the police directly to where he'd actually buried or just left the corpses, because he did just genuinely just leave the corpses in his path, so to speak. The Colombian newspapers called him the Beast. They dubbed him the world's worst serial killer, and he was also known as Tribilin, which is the name for the Disney character Goofy. Don't ask me where that one comes from. Goofy, lovable, dumb dog. This guy, horrific paedophile serial killer of the worst type of horror you could ever imagine, but nonetheless, some reason they called him Goofy as well. I don't know.
I think that might have been an attempt at an insult, calling him Goofy. Instead of, you are potentially the most prolific serial killer of children and rapist of children in the history of the world, you're also Goofy. The Disney character. You know, that might have been an attempt to bring his ego down. Just throwing that out, just guessing.
Whether that's to just make people in the local area less terrified, but it certainly wouldn't have made me okay, whatever you called him. So the murders would often play out in the same way. Garavito had this method. He would walk around, you know, local centres, and he'd be looking for victims. He would literally be able to spot them. And remember, these are poor victims. They might be orphans, they might be homeless, so they're looking for money, they're looking for food. You know, it's not very hard to imagine that if a child is in such need, that they're going to believe an adult who offers them something nice is nice. You know, it's not how children think. It's not how a child believes the world is. You know, when somebody comes over and gives you some sweets, you don't think they want to go and kill me and torture me. It's just not the way that children think. And that's what's really sad about this, that children are often victims of paedophilia, child molestation and murder because they're trusting, and they're meant to trust us. We're human adults. We're meant to be the ones who protect them. We're meant to be the ones who keep them safe. And what really upsets me about cases like this, apart from the obvious horror in itself, is that these children already had nothing. I mean, these were already children with less than any child should ever be born into. And yet here he was, stalking them as a predator, taking them to their deaths. It's just a horrific set of circumstances. And even worse, that sometimes he'd pretend that he was begging, or he was a priest, so a really trusted individual. And he had a way and a method where he would basically lure these children away. He'd take them to spots that he'd scoped out. Usually they'd be hidden away. They'd be in wooded areas on the outskirts of the towns. And he'd use exactly the same location again and again in that area. Because remember, he was very transient. He would come somewhere, carry out his horrific murders, and then move on. And he knew why he was doing that, because the police just didn't join the dots. So it was a really effective way of killing without consequence. So he would take the children to exactly the same place where he'd murdered other children. And get this, those poor, unsuspecting children would often be walking past the carcasses of the previous murdered kids. And he wouldn't hide them. So they'd be walking into this macabre graveyard of mutilated bodies, and they would be smelling them and starting to notice them, but it was too late at that point. Imagine what's going on in that child's head, just being taken to their death by this man that they thought was some kind of kind stranger, and then being met as they go further into these wooded areas and seeing corpses, rotting corpses. And they were the last visions that child would see, aside from the bloody death that they would entertain at the hands of this bastard, basically. You know, he was organised and he was so ruthless. This was not somebody who had any understanding of the pain and agony that he was putting his victims through, even though he himself had been raped. And I will talk about that in a little while. But even though he himself had had this kind of abuse occur to him, it didn't alter his enjoyment. You know, he would tie his victims up, he would torture them, he would get really drunk. And I think that part of the reason he got drunk, don't think for 1 minute I'm saying he got drunk so that he could be a step away from his crime. I don't believe that. I know that it could seem that way. I believe that he drank because he knew that he could be even more torturous. The more he drank, the more his inhibitions slipped, the more he could play out his dark fantasy, the more he could, yes, disassociate himself to some degree from the victim, as in he wouldn't hear or feel them in the same way, he wouldn't notice their fear and agony in the same context. But nonetheless, I think it would be more about the fact that he could just really take time and almost celebrate. That's why he was drinking the alcohol. He was kind of having his best night out.
The more I drink, I just get fun. Not that kind of fun. I just have fun. I enjoy time. I talk a lot. I talk a lot more than normal. I'm a fun drunk. I don't really get drunk. I get a good buzz. You know what? Not to him. Just cheers to people who are going to drink right now. Not in the mood to kill 400 children. You know, if I was, I wouldn't have just had a salad. I'm pretty sure that means I'm not a serial killer. I'm sure.
That's how far away this kind of man is from the reality of you and me thinking about this now. You know, all we want to go and do.
I'm going to go the other way and just say that alcohol seems to, bring about a loosening of inhibition. Inhibition. Is that the word? I got to cough again. It frees you up. How about that? And I can see somebody getting drunk to tell themselves to do things. Or to follow through with them. Some people drink for a little bit of confidence to approach a woman. Not saying this is the same, but maybe he has to drink. Maybe he had sex with a child, tortures a child, has sex with a child. And then he drinks to kill them because maybe that is what he needs. I don't know. I think that being drunk does, to me, I know that she's saying it means nothing. To me, it means something. I think that there's a reason for it, and maybe it is that he didn't have the ability to act things out without it. I could very well be wrong, which wouldn't be the first time. That's just my stance on that.
Do is find him and remove him from this world. That's the way you feel, isn't it? That the one thing that we all want to do is to stop this kind of beast being anywhere near children who deserve so much better. And he enjoyed the kind of stuff that he did to these children, apart from the fact that he tended to slit their throats or decapitate them at the end, he would often play with their bodies, he would dismember them. And that in itself shows there is a level of gratuitous enjoyment. That's just horrifying. And the reason I said he got away with it is because, let's be honest, we can say that because the police didn't really have their stuff together, they hadn't got the organisation that we've got in Western society and so on and so forth, but let's just call it as it is. They didn't care. They didn't care. They weren't interested in orphan kids. They weren't interested in homeless kids. Believe me, in certain countries, children genuinely on the streets are considered vermin. It is dangerous for children to be on the streets because there is a legitimate allowance for them to be, shall we say, dealt with. Honestly, look it up. There's a lot of evidence out there and it's terrifying, but it's also very real. So the police were not concerned particularly about the fact that kids just were going missing, because those missing kids were not linked to individuals of worth and meaning. So there wasn't anybody coming and moaning about it, so to speak. And Garavito was pretty good at changing the way that he looked. He'd move from town to town regularly, he'd change his appearance. I'll put some pictures here so you can kind of see the way that he'd do that. He'd use fake names, stolen identities, so he's really effective. And remember, why is he doing this? He's not doing this to escape, he's doing this to continue. Him moving from place to place isn't about evading capture, it's about the fact that he loves his trade. This is his full-time job. It's as simple as that.
I'm going to separate here and just say that he's changing up so that he can continue, yes. But as much as people like to kill, they would much prefer to not be caught. You can kill all you want, but as soon as you kill the first time, what's the one thing you're trying to avoid? Being arrested. So you change up, just in case somebody saw you with that child. They give a description. You're not changing up to necessarily continue. You're changing up to protect yourself so you don't get caught. My opinion on that.
He's fully committed to this work. He's good at it as far as he's concerned. And more importantly, he doesn't really have to be that organized around what he does with the bodies. He just kind of leaves them because no one's looking. And the truth is that even when the authorities caught on that there were 36 bodies in a makeshift type of grave, they didn't put it down to an individual. Because the idea that one man, that one person could be responsible for 36 deaths, let alone nearly 400, that was just so outside the realm of something that the police could process. So even in that case, they didn't realistically understand that they were dealing with one human being, not a group of satanic murderers. Because the police were informed occasionally the victims were going missing, when we've looked historically at why they didn't do anything about it, they just didn't take them seriously. When they were told that kids had gone missing, they didn't take it seriously. The kids came from disadvantaged backgrounds. They had problems because they didn't do DNA at the time properly, and they didn't use fingerprint technology regularly. So they weren't very good at compiling and organizing profiles on criminals. So simply, it's easy to get away with murder. And we know that in certain countries, it's still relatively easy to get away with murder. The problem that gets me though, the one thing that kind of sticks in my throat, and it really does, because we're talking about child killing to a degree that I was unaware had ever happened under the hands of one person. I am absolutely aware that child killing happens very regularly, but I tend to think about the fact that there are bigger organisations sometimes at work where child sex exploitation, sex trafficking, murder are concerned. But when you think about one person and this capacity, it just kind of blows your mind, doesn't it? And there were quite a few missed opportunities to stop him. One was in June 1996. They found a decapitated boy who'd been killed in a place called Boyaca. And the victim's mum found out that before he'd been found dead, he'd been seen in a shop buying sweets because a stranger was buying them for him. And this stranger was buying sweets for a few children. And that actually led to Garavito being questioned by the police. And we admitted it. Yeah, I absolutely bought sweets for the children. So they let him go. They weren't like, oh, it's a little bit strange that you were buying sweets for children that you didn't know, and then one of these children turns up dead. But they just let him go. And 4 days after they let him go, a 13-year-old boy was murdered. 4 days. It was in a slightly different place called Pereira, but nonetheless, it was really close by, and the authorities didn't even connect the dots. In fact, they didn't connect the dots at all until after the mass grave was found. And it was only at that point, even though they thought it was a satanic cult, that they started to trigger a nationwide task force. Because of this particular belief that there could be this crazy cult going around murdering children, they started to ask questions. in other police authorities. And because of that, they started to ask questions about similarities. Are there any other children who've gone missing in your area? Has there been any strange occurrences in your town? And that's where we begin to start making some changes and traction to this case.
We're going to go back another 5 seconds. All right, we're going to end this here. We'll be back with the final part. Just real fast. I've been at a gas station where I was paying and I was walking out and there were kids there and they had some candy. And they were, I don't know if I have enough money. And I paid for it. Not because I'm a murderer of children, but because it's just kids and getting candy. Who cares? I don't think that makes you. Hold on, let me rephrase that. I hope that does not make you a child killer, because if so, I just want to apologize, because I am 398 behind him. 400 behind him. So I have to get busy. So I'm going to go ahead and end this here. We'll be back with part 3. Until then, have a good day. Have a good night.